Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Paul Harris and I am president of the City Club's Board of Directors. So far, 2013 has been a high-profile year for issues involving the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, or LGBT population in the U.S. and abroad. In March, Republican U.S. Senator Rob Portman from Ohio stunned many by announcing that he had changed his views on same-sex marriage. In his statement, Senator Portman said that he has, quote, come to believe that if two people are prepared to make a lifetime commitment to love and care for each other in good times and in bad, the government shouldn't deny them the opportunity to get married, end quote. In June, the U.S. Supreme Court issued two highly anticipated rulings on same-sex marriage. The court determined to leave in place a lower court ruling striking down California's Proposition 8, which had banned same-sex marriages. And the court found a key provision of the Defense of Marriage Act, a 1996 law, by the way, known as DOMA, that denied federal benefits to same-sex couples who are legally married in their states. The court found that to be unconstitutional. More recently, a new Russian law imposing fines on individuals who promote homosexuality among youth has received significant media attention, particularly in the context of Russia's upcoming hosting of the 2014 Winter Olympics. Public opinion polls have shown support in the United States for same-sex marriage. For example, a CBS News poll taken from July 18 to 22 posed the question, do you think it should be legal or not legal for same-sex couples to marry? 55% responded legal and 39% not legal. Yet, according to Marriage Equality USA, as of July 2013, 50% of Americans reside in states or counties or cities that recognize various forms of legal relationships, but 30 states ban all types of unions except one-man, one-woman couples. Now, with that backdrop, we are pleased to offer today's program a conversation with Elyzabeth Holford and Tim Downing. Ms. Holford is the Executive Director of Equality Ohio, an organization founded in 2005 following Ohio's passage of a constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage and civil unions. The organization's mission is to achieve, through advocacy and education, fair treatment and equal opportunity for all Ohioans, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. Mr. Downing is a partner at the Cleveland-based law firm Ulmer and Berne and co-chair of the board of the Human Rights Campaign, a civil rights organization founded in 1980 whose goal is to achieve equality for LGBT Americans. I will now turn today's City Club of Cleveland program over to Mr. Downing.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to the City Club for having us here today. As I sit here, I reflect upon the last time I was here, and there's someone else in the room, Professor Susan Becker, who is on the stage with me, along with David Tryon and then State Representative Bill Seitz, when we were debating the passage of the constitutional amendment that, alas, became law and has brought us full circle. But before I actually begin my remarks, I'd like to pay tribute to my law firm and my managing partner who's here today. Thank you, Kip, for joining us. And I'd like to also say thank you to my dad, who's here in the audience. I wouldn't be here without you, obviously, so thank you. So I'd like to frame this discussion. The Windsor case and the Hollingsworth case, there's going to be another speaker to talk about sort of the rulings, and Paul briefly touched on them. But what the result of those really, what they mean now, is what they mean now from a national perspective is we really live in two Americas. We live in America where in the 13 states in the District of Columbia where marriage equality is a reality, and in the other part of America, the 37 states, including this one, where it's not. So what does that mean? It means that if you live in a place like Ohio and you're legally married, you live in this state of confusion because you may get some federal benefits, but you may not get others, depending on whether a federal department recognizes your marriage based upon where you reside or where you got married. And it depends department by department what the result will be. For example, if you're a member of the military, they decide whether you're legally married based upon where you got married. So if you are a member of the military and you're a veteran, for example, here, or you're an active duty member, you will get your active duty member benefits as a spouse of a member. However, for Social Security purposes, the Social Security Administration does not recognize the marriage based upon where it took place. It's where you live. And so for married couples here in Ohio to get Social Security benefits, we have to wait for a ruling through the rulemaking process from the Social Security Administration as to whether or not those benefits are going to be available to married couples here in Ohio. So this creates a dilemma, and ultimately it's going to be up to the court, some court, to bring this to closure. And at the Human Rights Campaign, what we're going to be doing now from this moment forward is to try to tell America we can't have two Americas. We need to have one America. And so one of the first things that our president, Chad Griffin, did right after the ruling is he went to, starting in Salt Lake City, Utah, he traveled across the country to small towns, mostly in the South and in the West, and held town hall meetings. And one in particular that I'd like to share with you was one that took place in Oxford, Mississippi. Chad had been delayed somewhere in Virginia. His plane was very late, and he was supposed to be in Oxford for a rally beginning at 6:30 in the evening. He arrived at 10:30, and en route, because of his plane was delayed, and he called the staff who was on the ground and said, please tell everyone I'm still coming. And when he arrived in Oxford, Mississippi, at 10:30 at night, there were 400 people waiting for him in a crowded barn-like structure that he said that was about 100 degrees, and it was very hot, but they all waited because they're yearning for equality, and people are yearning for equality all over America. So the Human Rights Campaign, people think of us as a political organization, and yes, we are that, but we are so much more than that. We're working every day to make sure there is workplace equality for all Americans. We're working every day so that LGBT families and their children are protected, and that the health and safety of LGBT Americans is taken seriously, and that we have programs that are looking after that. And we have groundbreaking programs that we're going to be using to bridge this gap of two Americas, such as our corporate equality index that some companies, even in this city, in this region, participate in. We have a welcoming schools program, which is an anti-bullying program, and we have a groundbreaking religion and faith program where we're working with churches and synagogues and mosques across the country so that we are going to be in people's church basements and in their living rooms explaining to them why two Americas must come to an end. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth, who is going to tell us about what Equality Ohio is doing and what it looks like here in Ohio. So, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Tim. I'd like to start with a few thank yous. First of all, a thank you for this opportunity to the City Club. I'm very excited to be here and to have by my side Tim Downing. We've sat next to each other at a few of these things, but it is very exciting to be here with the City Club. My second thank you goes out to all of you for being here with us today. It means a lot. I see a lot of people that I know and also quite a few that I don't, and I'm very grateful to you for taking the time out to both listen and also to actively participate with your questions a little bit later. I'd also like to thank my board chair, Wally Lancy. He is the chair of the Equality Ohio Education Fund Board, and I want to thank you for not only being here, but for all that you do every day to help us across the state. When I think about what's going on in Ohio specifically, I think I'll start with a literary reference. These are the best of times, and these are the worst of times. I'll try to stick to that theme as we go forward, but around the idea of these are the best of times, we should take a minute and think just for a second about history. And the first thing that comes to mind, because of the day that it is today, is that we know a lot of people right now that are either on their way to or are preparing to go to Washington, D.C. to celebrate the 50th anniversary of what was and what is in our history the largest civil rights march and one of the most momentous moments in our history. That's exciting. And a lot has changed since then, but there are many things that have not. We still live in a divided America in many, many ways. Also, when I think about history, I think about what Tim was just talking about. We have 13 states in the United States that recognize same-sex marriage. That's amazing. We have the District of Columbia. We have 5 Native American tribes that recognize same-sex marriage. And Native American tribes are considered sovereign nations in U.S. law. When you think about that, that right there is pretty amazing. We also have quite a few things going on in Ohio, but something that I find historic and that we should mark in our minds and soon will be marked in record books is that we have a case, a temporary restraining order was issued to Jim Obergefell and to John Arthur in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it was a federal case, but what it will enable, that temporary restraining order in a very sad, sad circumstance, will enable the first same-sex marriage to be on record, albeit perhaps on a death certificate, but to be on record in Ohio. So when we think about it, actually history is being made every day. And it's being made in Ohio right now. I want to talk just a little bit about that case because there's some history kind of embedded in that case. Justice Black down in Cincinnati basically said, and I love the first line of the case because it is contrary to what many people believe. The first line of his decision says, "This is not a complicated case." I will say that in my lifetime, I didn't think anybody would be saying that aloud in a judicial decision. Those words are powerful to me for many words. But if you dig a little bit deeper into that very decision, there are 4 things that when you file, and I'm probably going to have to ask Tim to help me out here because I haven't practiced law in a long time. But in a federal TRO, temporary restraining order case, there are 4 things that you have to prove. One is that there is the opportunity for substantial injury to the moving party. Check. Second, that there is a likelihood of success by the on the merits by the moving party. Third, that there is not substantial harm to others. And fourth, that it serves the public interest. I won't go through all that Justice Black went through in that decision, but I remember a day not too long ago, in fact it was the Proposition 8 case in California, where there was testimony after testimony after presentation after testimony about why there would be no harm if a same-sex couple was allowed to marry. And in a few, I don't think it even goes beyond a paragraph, maybe a paragraph and a half, Justice Black dismisses that. Nope. There's obviously no harm. In fact, it's just recognizing love. These are historic moments. These are the things that allow me to say these are the best of times. But let's talk about Ohio. I live in a state right now where I can be fired because I'm gay, or because somebody thinks that I'm gay.
And if I could just interrupt 1 second, and that is also the case in 29 other states across this country.
I also live in a state where I could not be served in a restaurant simply because of who I am. I live in a state where I can be denied a mortgage or kicked out of my home, my rental, denied the ability to rent because of who I am. That's problematic. I live in a state where 80% of children who are bullied because they are gay or because somebody thinks they're gay. Chokes me up, 80%. In Ohio. That's not a national figure. That's horrific. I also live in a state where if I am gay and because of that reason I am harmed, beaten up, kicked to the side of the road, which recently happened, I am not protected under our Hate Crimes Act. I also live in a state where if I change my gender, I am in 1 of 3 states where I cannot change my birth certificate to reflect that change. So to me, that's a little bit, okay, actually it's a little bit to a lot of the worst of times. We do not have a non-discrimination law in Ohio that covers us. We do not have anti-bullying enumeration. We do not have enumeration in the Hate Crimes Act. And we have the issue of not being able to change birth certificates. Oh, and we also have a marriage inequality amendment. And we have a DOMA, and we don't just have a DOMA that some states have, or like the federal DOMA, we have what's called a super DOMA, because we want to make sure not only can you not get married in this state, but you also cannot have a relationship that's a civil union or a domestic partnership that looks anything like a marriage. That's what a super DOMA is, if you wonder, and woohoo, in Ohio, we have that. So the worst of times, and really the issue, the worst of times in Ohio is we have a lot of work to do. Part of the best of times is that I believe that we can do this, and I believe in the next 3 to 5 years that we can take care of every single one of those issues and, in fact, get down to the business of living together in fairness, with dignity, and with honesty in a state that treats everybody fairly. And don't think for a minute that that's not our history. The history of Ohio is one of fairness and dignity. People came here for jobs. We have very close by, we have the Glass City, right? We had the steel mills. We had the business engine very early on in Cincinnati, and we have both manufacturing here in our history in Cleveland, as well as business, banking, a financial center. This is a state where people traditionally, it is part of our history that people came here for jobs. The other reason they came here is they came here to raise their families together in dignity. And don't forget, an essential part of our history is that we were a large part and a major part of the Underground Railroad. And in fact, during the Great Migration, people stopped here. As the trains went rolling through, people got off because they saw farmland that they could own without a master and raise their families in equality and in dignity. But right now, Ohio is one of those states, we are one of 30, that have a constitutional inequality amendment. And I don't see any way that Ohio can stand for or allow us to be part of a divided America or part of that second-class citizenship idea. It is not the ideal that Ohio was founded on. It is not the ideal that when I travel around the state that I hear people talk about. People are about fairness in this state. It's anecdotal, absolutely. But an example for me today was stopping, I did drive here this morning, and stopping in a rest stop, and I do try to speak to people wherever I am about our rights. So working there at the rest stop was somebody who was very happy to share with me many things, including the fact that he was 77 years old, and that his history was that he had been a trucker, and before that a machinist. And he was very willing to talk about all the changes that he had seen in his life. And then the question came, although I would have brought it up, but the question came, well, what do you do, dear? And I decided right there that I am dear. But I also decided that I would explain in detail. And in fact, it almost made me late today, to be honest. And I started down the path of discussing the work that I do, the reason that I do it, why I left, literally, corporate America, to come to Ohio, come back to Ohio, incidentally, to do this work right here and right now. And I told him exactly where I was going today. There were several large sighs and pauses, and he stopped. And at that point, his name was Bill, and he knew that mine was Elizabeth. And he said, Elizabeth, everybody in the United States has the right to be treated equally. You go there and you do a good job today there, dear. So when I think about marriage equality and after DOMA and what does this mean in Ohio, you will hear a lot of people. In fact, there's almost a frenzy around, oh my gosh, there's this groundswell across the country. There's this groundswell for marriage, and we should have this yesterday, but we should at least have it tomorrow. And my gosh, we're going to go forward in 2014. And I need you to hear my response to that. 2014, going forward with marriage equality, absolutely would be a wonderful thing. If, in fact, we have done the groundwork and we can prove that we are going to win. Why is that important? Why don't you want to run up and do a marriage equality campaign and perhaps lose? Why not, it's momentum. Throw caution to the wind. There's excitement. There's a couple reasons. First of all, we will be, when, not if, when we overturn our marriage inequality amendment, when we repeal and replace it with a marriage equality amendment, we will be the largest state with a constitutional ban to have done that. We will also, I think, be among one of the earliest ones to do that. No, none of those other states, those 13 states, did not have a constitutional ban. Those 13 other states and D.C. also already had non-discrimination statutes in place. They'd already done that groundwork. In fact, in Maine, the first groundwork that was done was, and the first referendum that was passed, was around non-discrimination. So the conversations had been started and the persuasion had already begun. And we also all know in Ohio that as Ohio goes, so goes the country. So don't think that when we start, no matter how much support we have, do not be naive and think that the opposition is going to go, well, it's just Ohio. Oh, no, 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 no. Just like in a presidential year, everybody will be here and everybody will be trying to get out every single vote, both for, we will be on the for side, and against. So it will be a heated battle and we have to be ready. And we have to know our numbers. I get accused of bringing up numbers all the time by people that would like us to go forward sort of, I don't want to say blindly, but I'll go ahead and say blindly. I'll say blithely. There's another B word. The reason we don't want to go forward blithely is we do not yet have the numbers in Ohio. Now, why are numbers important? Because no matter how much momentum you have, what is your measure of momentum? What is your measure of momentum? It's polling. It's the numbers that show who you can get out to vote, get out of that living room, get out from in front of the television, actually to the polling place, voting, and not just voting, but voting in favor. That represents a phenomenal amount of work. And right now the polling is not good. Back in March of this year, Quinnipiac, they seem to love Ohio and do many, many surveys. Quinnipiac did a marriage equality survey. We polled at 46%. Oh, that's only a few percentage points. That's a leap. You want to be polling, every state that has marriage equality right now was polling at over 51%, and most of them were around 55 before they went to the polls. Because what happens on voting day that we all know? Not everybody shows up, or people that were polling saying, ooh, I'm really about fairness, when they actually got in there, they changed their minds. Nobody likes in a questionnaire, particularly if it's face-to-face, to say, oh, I'm a discriminator. Very few people will do that. So we have to be realistic about the numbers. And there have been other polls done. That same month there was a poll done that the Dispatch put out that was actually over 50%. It was a poll randomly done and was not of registered voters. Now what we know from every other state and from working with our national partners is that your polling has to be done not just of registered voters, but of likely registered voters. So a few months after that, we actually had polls in the field done by Goodwin and Simon, and Amy Simon is the messaging person, but also the pollster. That firm has worked with every successful marriage campaign thus far in the United States, and thank heavens, she is working with us. And our poll was on many things, including non-discrimination, and our poll at that time was at 46%. And it was done after Portman's announcement. We found absolutely no bump. Negative and positive canceled each other out. Why is that important? Because some people will go around saying, oh, the Portman bump, and oh, the this bump, and oh, the that. You have to know your numbers. You have to be grounded in reality. I'm one of the most emotionally excited about our issues people you will ever met. And there's a few people here that know that because they're on my board. They have to put up with me regularly. But I couple that with a grounding in fact. It is extremely important as we go forward that we know the facts, that we know our numbers, that we continue to poll, and that we pay attention. The other thing we know is that it takes more than just ourselves to win. The estimates of the number of LGBT people in the state of Ohio is around 400,000. That's not enough to win. The number of transgender people in the state, right around 35 to 37,000. Still not enough people to win. So the work that we do at Equality Ohio is intersectional in nature. We go to many communities. We work from the ground up. We talk to people about the issues. We work on their issues because you cannot get somebody to go for you if you do not show for them. So the work that we're doing right now around the state is intersectional, it's community-based, it is compassionate, and it is about growing support for what? For full equality. So that the laws in Ohio will reflect and protect every single one of us. A few more numbers to throw at you. We also have a fairly good idea of how many votes it'll take. The last presidential election, there were 8 million Ohioans that were registered to vote. About 7.7% actually voted. 7.7 million. So to get to half of that, somebody do some math there for me, I think we're at 2.9 No, I'm sorry, 5.6%. 5.6% million voted. So we're at about 2.9 in a presidential year, assuming that that many people show up and actually vote. Our last gubernatorial election, 8 million registered, 4 million voted, so we need 2.1, and that's just for 51%. In a non-election year, our last non-election year, I think we were at that's where the 7.7 was in my head. We were 7.7 that were registered to vote. We actually had, I think we had about 3, just about 3. So we still have to get between 1.5 to 1.7 million in a non-election year voting in our favor. To a lot of people, when I talk about that, that's not fun and that's not exciting. But to me, it is fun, it is exciting because it grounds us, right? It lets us know what we have to do in order to succeed. And that's a lot of conversations. That's a lot of effort. That's a lot of media. How much does it cost to actually do a ballot campaign in Ohio? We don't know exactly. We know what some other ones have cost in Ohio. We also know what some of the other numbers are in other states. For instance, in the state of Washington, where they had a referendum. There's about 5.1 million people there, and that cost 15 million. In the state of Maine, 1.3 million is the population. They spent 9 million. In the state of Maryland, 4.5 million people, and they spent 6.5 million. Ohio, 11.5 million people. So as we prepare for this, one thing that I know at Equality Ohio, not only can we not do it alone in terms of the LGBT community, and that we are working with our allies, with faith communities, with the business community, with people of color, with our national partners. Every state that's won marriage equality has been partnered with national LGBT organizations. Why? One would think the answer is resources. That is part of the answer, and don't allow yourself to think it is just financial resources. It is also operational resources. The ability to get people into places where they can train to actually do conversations of persuasion and have conversations like I had at the rest stop this morning, right? That is how we move people. It is not going forward and saying, here, sign this, boom, here, sign this, boom. No, 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 no. It is actually having the conversations, assuring people that their vote counts and that they are, in fact, voting for somebody that they now have met and know, and that they're voting for fairness, for dignity, for the recognition of all of us in a way that supports all of us. The other thing that are, together with certainly financial support and also operational support, is that in our national organizations, there is a level of expertise on doing campaigns, but also on addressing our issues that is unparalleled, absolutely unparalleled. So I feel fortunate to say that my partners, actually our partners in Ohio, are HRC, are the task force, are the ACLU, Lambda Legal, GIL, other organizations, BISC, the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center, who does all the work. You know, the other thing you think about when you're getting ready to do this is, how does this affect the election? A great example is in Oregon, which is also a ballot amendment state. In fact, they do quite a few all the time. It's almost a joke when you're in Oregon. It's like, oh yeah, put that coffee issue up for a ballot amendment. No problem. But one of the things, they also, similar to our state, they have what are called Evergreen Signatures. So that once you get a signature, it actually can be carried on another year so you don't have to get them again. They have enough signatures. They have enough signatures right now to go forward in 2013, and they are not. Why? Because they've done research with the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center and others, and the effect on other issues that are going forward and also other issues that are on the ballot and how they affect the Marriage Equality Amendment don't play well for this year. So they're waiting a year. They're making, that whole groundswell, this is so exciting, let's go forward. They're making a reasoned, factually based, numbers-based, intelligent decision because they want to go forward when they can win. So when somebody asks me, why not 2014? I do like to start with, well, absolutely. It's a great year, but we will go forward when the time is right. And that's a commitment I make every day. That's a commitment I make to all of you. We are doing the work. We are finding the resources. We are doing not just the homework of the numbers, but we're also doing the homework around the state of lifting people up to support us. And how do you do that? You do it together. I'll say it again. You cannot go unless you show. So we cannot go forward unless we're showing up around the state, doing the kind of work that pulls people together, gets them excited not only about the fact that we are there working with them in an intersectional way, but also opens it up so that they also can work with us.
Isn't she amazing?
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a Friday Forum featuring Elyzabeth Holford, Executive Director of Equality Ohio, and Tim Downing, Co-Chair for the Board of Directors of the Human Rights Campaign. We will return to them momentarily for our traditional City Club questions. We encourage you to formulate questions now, and please try to keep them brief and to the point so we can get as many questions in as possible. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via broadcast on WVIZ PBS, 90.3 WCPN, and 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, WTAM, or one of the many broadcast partners across the country. Broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC, and our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. There is a lot happening at the City Club in September, including the Cleveland mayoral debate on September 18, and the State of the Schools on September 25th at Public Auditorium. For more information about our upcoming programs, to make a reservation or to order a CD or DVD of one of our many programs, please refer to our website, and that's www.cityclub.org. We welcome guests today at tables hosted by the law firm Baker & Hostetler, Consolidated Graphics, Gray's Auctioneers, Ron Bailey and Bill Edwards, the Human Rights Campaign, and the law firm Ulmer and Berne. Thank you all for your strong support. Now, as promised, we would like to return to our speakers for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone here today, including guests. Holding the microphones today are City Club volunteer Spencer Keisel, there's Spencer, and City Club Program Director Carrie Miller. First question, please.
Hi, thanks. It's good to see both of you here. What can be done now? There are lots of conversations, individual conversations, but from a perspective of public education and getting the word out that this is the right thing to do, what can be done now?
Well, I'll start with that from the national perspective. We are going to be launching a nationwide project to try to bridge this gap of two Americas by going into small towns, by having town hall meetings, by going to newspaper editorial boards and local television stations, and really starting the education process, by going into church basements using our religion and faith program, by continuing to talk to corporate America and get more corporations on board with our corporate equality index, going into hospitals and clinics and talking about our healthcare equality index, and working with small towns across America to get them to enact ordinances that are protective of people, because in many parts of this country, all over the South, and frankly lots of this state as well, there are no protections even at the city level. We're lucky here in Cleveland that we have them, but in lots of parts of Ohio we don't. So from a national perspective, that's what we will be doing, and how you can help, because we're going to need volunteers to do that work. Elizabeth?
The simple answer is participate, and I have a few very specific things that I can lay out for you right now. We have a few campaigns that we'll be announcing very shortly that I'll be able to talk about, but the first one I actually can't talk about right now, and we have a full campaign for passing the Equal Housing and Employment Act, which is very catchily not EHEA. We evidently like a lot of, in our community, we like to have a lot of alphabet letters. So we'll be launching that campaign very shortly. And one of the reasons to participate in that is to remember that the first campaign that went through as a referendum and passed in Maine was a non-discrimination campaign. And within that campaign, they were able to start discussions about fairness and also about marriage equality. As we move this campaign forward, we know that we have very specific targets in terms of our legislature that we are trying to move. We have 4 senators we are trying to move and 11 representatives. And we are going to move them, and we are going to get this passed before the end of 2014. It's an aggressive campaign. We need your help. We need your help in churches. We need your help in communities. We need business support. We need business support in a way that people are actually coordinating with us to actually speak to their representatives, to actually talk about, hey, I voted for you, I've given money to your campaign, we do this in our company, we need this in the state. So there are very specific things, and if you will get in touch with us at equalityohio.org, we will be absolutely happy to give you very, very specific opportunities to participate. Thank you.
Ms. Holford, thank you very much for your analysis of the political process in Ohio. My question is, what's percolating in the courts? Is there anything going to happen that you know of that would be a constitutional, federal constitutional test of our issue 1?
I'm going to turn just a minute to him because he's much more the legal expert than I am.
I think, to answer your question, the case that Elizabeth referenced in her remarks is one of several cases that's been filed across the country that will tee this issue up and will bring to a head the constitutional amendment in Ohio. There are some similar cases that were filed in Michigan and in Pennsylvania. And so in Michigan and Ohio, at least, those are cases that will ultimately end up before the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals on whether or not Ohio, the way the ruling reads is that Judge Black said Ohio's issue 1 is unconstitutional. That was ultimately what he said. So it will get to the Sixth Circuit at some point. Once the stay order that he has in effect it's a continuous stay, but at some point that's going to be appealed. So it will come to a head.
I'll chime in that one of the slightly, again, the best of times and the worst of times sort of analysis there is that the Sixth Circuit is not exactly likely to rule in our favor. And that's why it is important that there are cases around the country that are going forward. And some people would say, well, oh my gosh, if these go forward, that will change what you're doing. Absolutely. I am one that will I'm an opportunist by nature about these issues, and we need to win in any way that we can. However, even if we win in court, we still do not have protections in our state laws, and it is essential that we move these forward.
Tim, Elizabeth, thanks for everything you do. There was a recent conversation that happened with Senator Portman's come to Jesus moment when he came to find equality was so important, where a civil war erupted between 2 anti-choice groups. And one of them, as you remember, said, we don't count that on the checklist for Senator Portman. The other one did. It sounds like the coalition you're building is intended to ensure that people who are faith-based, people who describe themselves as Christian, Jewish, Muslim, would be able to see that being anti-choice and being anti-equality are things that maybe aren't things that are pro-Ohio. Could you talk a little bit about what you're trying to do? Because it sounds like you're building a very large tent, and I think that situation is apropos to the moment.
Well, we are building a very large tent, and I think it's really important to note that we have embedded, certainly in our state constitution, but also in our Constitution, the idea of fairness and of religious freedom. So sometimes when I'm talking with people, they get quite excited about the fact that, well, people are we're going to have to marry people in our church. That's just not true. Right now, just looking at the Ohio Constitution, a Catholic church does not have to marry people that have been previously divorced. They are protected by they are protected in their religious freedom, and they are protected by law. So the same laws, right? The same laws that allow for that kind of freedom and protect you in your faith, in your beliefs, and your ability to practice that faith and practice those beliefs should also reflect that kind of absolutely ultimate dignity and fairness for everybody under the law. Because if we're going to protect that, certainly for faith, but also for anybody, we don't want a divided or 2 Americas. We want full protections for everyone.
And if I could just add one thing, Councilman, thank you for your question, is that one of the reasons why HRC is partnered so closely with Equality Ohio and with the National ACLU and National Food and Mary and the Gill Foundation is so that we don't have divisions within the community, and why we're adding not just LGBT specific organizations, but non-LGBT organizations to this big, giant coalition, because that's the only way we win.
Hello, my name is Melissa Yasnow. One thing that I noticed is that you were saying how we need to work together and keep momentum, and I'm wondering how HRC Inequality Ohio deals with individuals who decide that they don't want to work together with HRC or Equality Ohio. We have had, for example, even though Equality Ohio is not in support of putting it on the marriage equality on the ballot for 2014, I have already seen petitions on such. Or, for example, in 2010, a Wyoming couple didn't want to wait for national organizations and filed a challenge to Wyoming's marriage ban pro se. How do we handle individuals, or how does Equality Ohio and HRC handle individuals who want to go on their own and risk either losing momentum at the ballot box or setting bad precedent?
Go ahead.
Both is like, jump. Right? Well, this is going to sound like a strange answer, but I'm going to start where I start in my heart. And I start in my heart with any time there is conflict, my first instinct is to deal with that conflict with openness and with love. I'll concentrate on the openness part. The openness part is I encourage people to, I would never be one to discourage people from seeking marriage equality or full equality. In the same breath, I encourage people to pay attention to the details. We have a lot at stake. We have a lot at stake in Ohio. So I ask people to ask questions. That is the best way. It's not really a campaign against somebody that I will ever start, but I do encourage people to ask questions. Ask people that are gathering a petition if they are doing the groundwork, and if so, what that looks like, and how they are funded, and how they are doing that. Why do you want to ask those questions? Because we cannot afford to lose. And it is that simple. And yes, I am adamant about that. That was really lovingly said. We cannot afford to lose.
And Elizabeth is so right about that, because if we lose, the marriage equality movement in Ohio will be set back at least a decade. Well, it's possibly true. I mean, people disagree about that, but I think that we have to do this, and we have to do this right, and it has to be based on data, which we simply don't have yet. I mean, if you read Nate Silver, for example, I happen to read Nate Silver, who's a statistician who works for the New York Times now. I still think he works there. He did an analysis of all 50 states in the aftermath of these decisions, and saying when he predicted, based upon the makeup of the voters in that particular year and what the demographics will look like in that year, when marriage equality will pass. And he predicted Ohio would be the earliest 2015, more likely 2016, based upon who will be in the voting group and voting in those years. So, you know, I'm a numbers guy when it comes, because I'm a lawyer, and I like to base my decisions on evidence, not based upon what I'd like it to be. And so, like Elizabeth, I think we need to be smart about this and strategic about this.
But I do want to take issue with the beginning. You said Equality Ohio does not favor putting the ballot amendment, marriage equality, on the ballot in 2014, and I have never said that. I've said we go forward when the time is right. Could that be 2014? If everything is aligned and we can win, absolutely. That is the kind of decision that you make. But I have been quoted by some as saying 2018, 2020 was in one, I don't know where that came from, but consistently from my first day on the job, I have said we will go forward with a ballot amendment when the time is right. And it helps to understand the anatomy of a campaign, literally a ballot campaign. Every other ballot campaign around the United States that has been successful did not start with the gathering of signatures. You start with your persuasion campaign first. Why? Because you have to build support, and people drop off. Even if those signatures are still good, their support drops off unless you have had more than a please sign here conversation. That requires a campaign. That requires operations. That requires the kind of transparency so that you know what we're doing around the state. But please, please, please never say that I put any kind of date on a marriage equality ballot campaign, because I believe that to be folly. I believe that to be absolute folly.
Elyzabeth Holford, you're the head of a statewide Ohio organization which is trying very hard to bring equal rights to people who believe in same-sex marriage. Just as a casual observer, it seems to me that most of the support for that very worthwhile goal comes from the major cities in Cleveland, in Ohio, be it Cleveland or Toledo or perhaps Columbus, and that most of the resistance to this seems to come from the rural areas, the small towns. Is that observation correct? And if so, what do you think you can do to help those people in the small towns of Ohio come into the 21st century?
Well, your question is a little bit of a generalization, but it is pretty darn close to being accurate. And one of the things that we are engaged in right now in our non-discrimination campaign, and we are moving forward around the issue of marriage equality as well, is working locally, at a local level, to find, and we do know this is not just anecdotal. Many, many, many people, does not matter where you live in Ohio, many people know gay people. We know that LGBT people live in small communities. We also know that people know them, so we are working with various community organizations, and that's what I talked about when I talked about intersectionality. I talked about the different groups that we're working with, and we have groups in places like Pomeroy. We have groups in places like Athens, in places like Marietta, Bowling Green, Findlay, places that you would not expect. And are these huge groups? Well, no, these are small towns. But we have groups there. Sometimes it's chambers of commerce that have reached out to us. Sometimes it's a local church. Other times it's a combination of various people. And they are working with us around not just having conversations, but then also encouraging people to step forward and be heard. For instance, it does matter here in Cleveland, and I do know this, but it is a very powerful thing when a local city council member says, well, I support Equality Ohio, and I support a non-discrimination law, and I support marriage equality because, well, my son's gay, and actually either left the state or left this community, often to live in either Cleveland, Columbus, or Cincinnati, left the farm, left this rural area, left my small town hardware store. And the same is true, we're actually working with some farm organizations, literally, because there are people with the same experience. Either they're Aunt Helen, right, who always lived with her friend. I mean, we make that joke. Now we make that joke. But it's still the reality for many people in rural areas, not just in Ohio, but around the country. And so we help people, actually, this is a funny phrase perhaps to use, but we help people come out about their knowledge, straight people, our allies, come out about their knowledge of gay people and talk to their fellow small town people, or we literally have a program around helping people write an editorial, right? Write an editorial about their experience and put it in that small town paper, because I am not one of them. I'm actually kind of a read everything on the internet kind of a person. But in those small towns, that local paper or that local farm news is what people still read, and it influences them. So when they can see, oh, I didn't know Farmer Sally over there actually was supportive. I didn't know city council person so-and-so, or oh my gosh, our very own mayor, right? But those are the kind of conversations and those are the kind of experiences that help people move forward in smaller communities. How do I know this? Because it is the exact kind of campaign that was done in Maine after they lost in 2008. They reached out to faith communities specifically and to rural communities, and they did exactly what I'm describing. So although it sounds like I just made that up, it's actually part of what we've learned from our national partners about how to do this work in rural areas. Thank you. Thanks for that question.
My partner and I are parents of 2 young children by adoption. One of us is a legal parent, the other does not have legal standing. It leaves the children vulnerable. I wondered if, short of marriage equality, there are other initiatives going on in Ohio to protect LGBT families like second parent adoption.
Adoption is one of the issues. I sort of went through a long list of things. Adoption is one of the issues that we're working on. It's also important to note when people have that issue around families and around adoption, we should also know that over 20,000, if not more, but right now I think it's about 20,000 young people are in foster care right now around the state. So when someone says that they have adopted children, I say thank you, first of all, and also that we are working to change the status of the adoption laws in Ohio. It is a long fight, but we are definitely fighting that fight.
This is addressed to both of you. Richard Florida was well known for writing about the creative class and the value to any economy to be able to attract the most creatively talented people who can add to the economic strength of its community. I wonder if there is any way to measure whether those states, those communities that have been open on this issue, that are now comfortable with the same-sex marriage equality, whether or not anybody has been able to measure any economic advantage that would correlate with what Richard Florida was describing, that if you can attract talented people, you actually get an economic benefit. It may be hard to measure what's not happening in some places, but maybe you can measure what is happening elsewhere.
Well, I'll start with that question, and thank you for the question. There is actually somebody doing a study on that very issue, on how to measure it, from the Williams Institute right now. But from anecdotally, I can tell you that I personally have friends who have left this state for the very reason that the gentleman who asked the question about the adoption issue, it's because they have children, and they both can't be the parent of the child. And they literally were highly educated. Both of them, one professor, one was an administrator at Case Western Reserve University. And when the ban passed in 2004, they left the state and went to the state of Oregon. And so we lost, that was the brain drain we had. And I'm sure everybody in this room has a similar story they could tell of people they know have left this state because of our antiquated laws. So, Elizabeth?
Well, we talked about the brain drain, and a few years before I came on board, we actually commissioned a study on that, and there were very few participants. So we have, I'm very glad you asked that, because we're very focused on Ohio at Equality Ohio. There's a reason. And we are reinstituting that study, and we believe right now that we will be able to generate, we will not do the study, but we are reinstituting it. We'll be able to generate more participants. But when we think about that issue of economic equality, I also, I started earlier on when I was speaking, I said, I live in a state. Well, I live in a state where our governor currently likes to say, we're open for business, right? Jobs Ohio. And if we are really going to be a state that is open for business, then we really have to be a state that's open for business. We cannot draw a line around our state and call it hate, which is really what discrimination is. I mean, I've sort of kept it up here, but and we have things like the corporate index from HRC that lets us know what the larger corporations are doing. But when I first came on board, we looked at, because I was curious, this whole Jobs Ohio thing, right? And on that website, there are, I think, about 90 companies that are on there. I'm sorry, about 80 companies that are on that list. And they are SMEs, right? They're small to medium enterprises. And so I was like, well, how many of those have policies in place, right? I want to know my Ohio that I'm moving back into. How many of those companies actually have policies in place that protect LGBT people? And I, in my head, being the realist that I am, I thought, ooh, maybe we're going to be lucky if they're 30. And we actually, I quoted different numbers at different times, but we are still always working on that. And there's actually 79. There's actually 79. So what does that say to us? That says, let me see, businesses get it. They know what it means to be open for business because they're businesses, right? We have a governor that says that, and yet we do not have that law yet passed in Ohio, right? It hasn't passed yet. It's actually, this will be the 6th time that it's been brought up, but it hasn't passed. And then we recently, in the study that I referred to before that was done by Amy Simon, we have 8 out of 10 Ohioans saying that they think there should be a non-discrimination law passed that covers LGBT people. So I don't think that Ohio is out of step per se, but perhaps our legislature and our government are a little bit out of step with how real Ohioans, everyday working people and businesses feel about what it means to be open for business in Ohio.
I wonder if the two of you could comment on the fact that the Supreme Court and other federal courts have not provided strict scrutiny review for this issue. It's kind of why we're left to the voting ballot and to a state-by-state effort. And it really, it's despite the beautiful language in the recent Supreme Court opinions that indicate that this is a basic human rights issue, it's not afforded the same level of scrutiny. Do you have any insight on that?
I'll let him start.
I think that the reason for that is largely because of who's on the Supreme Court right now. I mean, when you had a Supreme Court justice just this week say we shouldn't be creating new classes of people to give protections to, it wasn't exactly that, but it was along those lines. That provides a window into the way he thinks about classifications. And for the non-lawyers in the room, what she's talking about is when you look at a constitutional issue, the courts will look at it really three ways. The government has to have a rational reason for the law, and that means a very low level of analysis, meaning there is some rational reason why this law exists. Then there's a mid-level scrutiny, which applies mostly to when gender inequality issues. And then strict scrutiny is about when we're dealing with race. So that's the three things. And I'm being told that we're out of time.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to a Friday forum featuring Elyzabeth Holford of Equality Ohio and Tim Downing of the Human Rights Campaign. Thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This program is now adjourned.